Welcome to Pioneer Mindset, a place where we challenge our mindset and address the discomfort in both business and life by finding clarity resulting in bold conviction. I'm your host, Garrett Ruskamp, fifth generation farmer, husband, and father from rural Nebraska. Whether you're navigating frustration from past decisions or worry about the uncertainty you face today in your business, we're going to learn from our struggles and take on new challenges with a resilient mindset. Join me as I share my journey of struggles I've faced in agriculture as a farmer and family man. I'm ready to dive into honest conversations to tackle the mindsets surrounding key issues that rural ag business owners face that will ultimately help you gain control, leading to a profitable and sustainable business. Let's adapt to Pioneer Mindset and get to it. Welcome back, everyone, to this week's episode of Pioneer Mindset. I'm glad to be talking to you here today. In Northeast Nebraska, we got ourselves a beautiful morning. It's a nice, chilly one here in early November. We had a pretty hard freeze. I'd say we got down to somewhere around almost the single digits. We're down around 10 or 11 degrees this morning. So finally getting really cold, hopefully killing some of those bugs out there, but then going to warm back up so we can get back to some of the rest of the fall activities that we're trying to do here on the farm. But on this week's episode, I'm really excited to talk about what can we do to bring value back to the farm? What can we do to bring additional revenue back to the farm? So that way you can be a value-adding asset to the operation. All right. So a big portion of what I was thinking about this week's episode was, what am I doing on our farm to bring back value, to add additional revenue to the bottom line? Maybe it's saving on expenses, maybe it's adding revenue. We can kind of go both ways there. But the big thing here, when I talk to you through Pioneer Mindset, through Pioneer Farmer, from Garrett Ruskamp here, I'm trying my best just to lead with integrity. And so when I say that, just trying to do the best that I can on our farm operation and be an example to others, as to what you can do within your own operation. How we can, focus not only on the business, but in the business, or, vice versa. They're focusing on the business and not solely in the business, doing day to day. That's one way to do things. But what can we do, on the farm, maybe off the farm? What can we do to bring value back? So that way we can really, truly do what we truly love and enjoy, right? I think like most of us, I just wanted to farm. Ever since I was a little kid, I remember my grandma saying, well, Garrett, he always came up to me. He just says, I want to be a farmer and I want to be a farmer. And that just kind of rung true as I grew up, right? And so all of a sudden, we get to where we're in high school, we're graduating, going to college, and trying to figure out what we're going to do to make it back to the farm in one shape or another, right? And so I think that's what it takes is I do whatever it takes is to make that happen, to get back to the farm. And I think most of us are kind of the same way. I've heard this said on a couple different podcasts here lately, one of those being Barn Talk, where Torque always talks about there's very few professions where somebody will go do something to get back to the farm, or like there's very few people that will go do a side job to get back to being a plumber or something like that. So how many people they want to come back to the farm, so they do all these other things so that way one day they can get back to the farm? There's just something about it, and I think most of us that are listening to this can probably agree that there's just something about being a farmer, caring for the land and the livestock, and for all that we've been entrusted with by God, and living this lifestyle because it's very unique and very special. But what is it going to take to do that? We got to do something creative. We got to be willing to try something new and not be afraid of failure, right? And so this is what this ultimately comes down to is willing to just do something different, not just strictly put the corn in the ground, go spray it, go combine it, and sell it. We got to be really creative. We got to do something additional to this. And so that's where I wanted to kind of go with this week's episode, right? And so on an additional note to that, as far as willing to try something new, I heard this a long, long time ago, and it's just something that always kind of comes back to me from time to time. I was talking with a guy about, at the time, I think I was in college and was looking at starting a trucking business because I liked to truck. I like to kind of run over the road a little bit. And so the one thing that he said is you just have to be willing to say yes. And starting out, when you're building something, you just have to be willing to say yes. And so I think that's really true is especially when you're starting out and you're trying to build something, you're trying to do different things, you have to be willing to say yes to maybe all these different things. Now, we want to get to the point where we can all of a sudden step back and say no to make sure that we're doing the things that actually serve us and saying no to things that don't serve us. We want to get to that point. But part of being willing to find out what those things are that serve us, that are actually providing value back to the operation, that are actually getting us a return, is we got to say yes to all these things and kind of learn by, trial by fire to some extent from the school of hard knocks by trying new things and failing sometimes and not being afraid of that failure. And so that's where I think I really want this to be a very optimistic episode, because we can get really doom and gloom. We can really talk about all the hardships we face as farmers and ranchers and everything that we're trying to deal with on a daily basis, all the negative things that are up against us. And so we can talk about that all day long. And I think there's a lot of merit to some of those. But I think we also need to be optimistic, right? Farmers are eternal optimists. And so that's why I want to focus on the good things here, give you some ideas, maybe spark some interest as to what we can do going into the end of the year, going into 2026. What can we do to really make sure that we are able to keep this lifestyle that we have, or maybe get yourself into that lifestyle, maybe be willing to get back to the farm, preserve this legacy that we've built up, and so make sure we can pass that on. So, we've always heard a lot of operations say, well, in order for a son or daughter to come back, they got to be willing to provide some value. And I think that's absolutely true. So in your case, what are you doing so that we can provide value back to the farm? And so I want to run down some things that we're actually doing on our farm. And so a big part of this week's episode, and I've been kind of reserved to some extent a lot of these things because, this is human nature for us, especially in farming, right? It's hard for us to sometimes be extremely open and honest with all the things that we're doing because we feel like it takes away our competitive advantage. And farmers, we just feel like, yeah, even though our neighbors down the road maybe aren't necessarily competing against each other directly, but if I've got a competitive advantage over them for all the things that I'm doing, why would I want to share that with them? Because that makes me better, makes me have that, like I said, that competitive advantage. This is probably just going back to our human instinct of survival is I'm not going to share all my secrets. I'm not going to share where the good fish are. I'm not going to share where the good hunting ground is, right? Because it gives us our survival instincts of being able to survive and outlast others. Okay. But going back to leading with integrity, going back to Pioneer Farmer just being built upon being willing to share everything that I'm doing and being able to help others and provide value towards others. That's where I've been kind of reserved on a lot of things that we're doing because I don't want to be looked down upon, or maybe I don't want to, like I said, share all of my secrets because, maybe Joe Blow down the road is going to be all of a sudden doing the same thing I am. And then that takes away my competitive advantage. Now I got to work harder to find something new to really help our operation out. All right. So I feel like that's such a negative downside to us in agriculture and human nature in general, whatever the case is. But we come back to that. And it's been one of those things that's been weighing on my mind that I don't share probably enough as I should. And so that's why with this week's episode, hopefully it doesn't get too long here, but want to just talk about all the things that we're doing on our farm. And I'm not trying to kind of brag myself up or pat myself up on the back, but just kind of sharing all the different things that we're able to do that I'm trying my best to provide value back to our farming operation. So that way it can stand on its own and be profitable venture. So that way it can, like I said, stand on its own. Okay. And so with that, I just want to share everything that we're doing or just kind of go into some different ideas. And the big thing here, as I kind of give the big takeaway, is so that way you can maybe pull something apart. Hey, maybe I can look into that. Maybe I should try this or that or the other thing. Or maybe I tried that, it didn't work, but what about this? Or maybe we kind of put a twist on this. Or maybe we look at some different things on farm versus off farm that we guy could be doing. So that's the big thing here. So let's get into this. So I'm going to first start with the different things that we are doing for Ruscamp Farms on farm as I've tried to implement since I've been back to the operation, tried to do things here and there. I'm not going to go super far back. I'm going to say probably more current. So the big thing here, as we dive into this, is I've done my best to apply for a lot of programs. And when I mean programs, I'm talking maybe like cover crop programs or things that kind of align with what we're already doing. I'm a big proponent of if you're already doing something and then you can apply for a program that's going to maybe provide some additional assistance. I think that's great. I don't necessarily like to change our entire farm practices just to go after a payment. So I got to be really careful there. That's what I've tried to really dance around. But there is a lot of dollars out there that a guy can kind of go after to bring some additional revenue back. Now, the one thing is it's not free to some extent in that it's going to take some time. It's going to take some requirements on your end. And that's why a lot of people tend to shy away from them because maybe it takes some time sitting in the office to fill out some paperwork and do all those things that we don't necessarily like, right? So some of those different programs that we've actually applied for, kind of going back to the cover crops, because that's something that I've believed in or is a really good thing for the soil health side of things. So, if we can do that, but then maybe also get some additional assistance for that, there's a lot of benefits, a lot of value added back to the operation right there. So a couple of those that we've gone through specifically would be like the ADM regenerations program. So that would be for applying for cover crops. If we plant in cover crops, maybe it's on new acres, maybe it's just a smaller payment. These might only be $5 or $10 payments an acre, right? So they don't add up very fast, but they do add up, right? And a couple of those that they had like last year, I don't know if they're still doing it, but like their emissions program, it was kind of like a carbon program, but you got paid for some of their emissions scoring. So if you kind of go through the work, and 45Z tax credits, those have kind of been a big one thrown out there that to my knowledge, hasn't come across yet, but I'm definitely been paying attention to those different programs. So one thing to really consider there, but just any sort of, whether it be carbon programs or cover crop programs, a lot of value that can be capitalized there that we can, not change necessarily the practices that we're doing to take advantage of those. Another one of those would be the Practical Farmers of Iowa. Got hooked up with them a few years back already. And part of that was because, if we're, say, planting a small grains, you can actually get paid a payment for planting the small grains. But then after that small grains, if you plant, say, a legume or something that fixes nitrogen, and then you plant corn that next year and you can reduce your nitrogen, you can get paid a payment for that as well. And just through them the other day, through being a part of the Practical Farmers of Iowa, I got selected to do a survey. And so they basically said, well, through different people or participants that are in the different programs, they kind of get selected every few years to be a part of doing the survey. And they just want to know kind of general information about your operation. So it took me probably a good hour to go through the survey with this guy on the phone, but I'm getting a $200 gift certificate for doing it basically. So you got to think about the time and that kind of return on our time for doing that. Basically $200 an hour is what I got for just putting my time in for giving them that information. And so that's a really good example there. Now, a big one here that I'm going to be sharing about that has been a pretty big asset to us here recently was through the Practical Farmers of Iowa. They've got a program out there called the Cover Crop Business Accelerator. And so, a lot of people probably heard of business accelerators, which focuses on the business side of things, which is really kind of what I do with Pioneer Farmer, is focusing on the business side of things. And so from the beginning, I'm like, well, that doesn't really interest me. But when you get to looking a little bit deeper into it and get to investigating and actually questioning what does this all entail, there were some financial incentives there that I thought were value back to the farming side of the operation. And it's promoting the cover crop side of things, or promoting if you have a cover crop business, whether it be custom seeding, maybe it's growing small grains or growing cover crop seed and then selling that on retail side of things. That's truly what it's trying to promote through the Practical Farmers of Iowa. And so with that, like you said, you could get maybe reimbursed for 10% of capital investment. Okay. And so we end up buying some bulk bins and not spending a lot, but 10% is going to be a little bit of money back there. And then you get, I think it was $20 for raising seed. So we've got some rye seed that we raised. So, I think it was only 20 acres. So times $20. So not a lot, but that's additional 20 acres back to the operation right there. And then the other big one there that we've been actually focusing on was if you're doing any sort of custom seeding. So custom drilling, maybe it's custom aerial application, or just any sort of custom work when it comes to cover crops, is you actually get $3 an acre back on that. And so this fall, we've been pushing pretty hard doing a lot of custom drilling. And so that's one that's going to be bringing a little bit of additional back on top of the custom revenue. This $3 an acre is going to be bringing more revenue back to the operation. Just because, we kind of did the work of finding the programs out there that are going to helping us bring that back to the operation. Okay. And so another big one here is going to be EQIP. For those that are you familiar with the NRCS's EQIP programs, there's a lot of different things a guy could go into there, but we applied for the EQIP program about a year ago. And so I think it's a 5-year program. So starting this year, 2025, going forward, we are in an EQIP program to where it helps pay us a little bit on cover crops. It pays for nutrient management, pest management, and then it's going to help on the soil sampling side of things as well. And so for our operation, we're getting a pretty good kickback here, right? Because of those three primary, so like I said, cover crop, nutrient management, and the pest management, right? And so with cover crops, if you're planting a single species or even a multi-species, we're doing a couple of those each. But it's like, I think $50 for single species and up to $70 an acre for multi-species. So we are, in a sense, getting paid, covering our seed expense, covering cost of application, and then some, getting paid to plant the cover crops, which, by the way, we might have done to some extent already. right? We might have maybe not done to the scale that we're doing now or to the level, maybe using the amount of diversity on the cover crop mixes, but we would have done that same thing already. And so that allows us to kind of play with some additional mixes there. So once again, bringing some revenue back, the nutrient management there, trying to follow the same guidelines. These are a lot of things that we probably should be doing already anyways. Maybe just cutting back on nutrients, maybe taking soil samples to make sure that we're not over applying. And the pest management, just make sure we're being mindful of everything we're doing there. So Equip, a really good program there that's bringing additional revenue back to us. The next one is going to be some of the local programs like the NRD. NRD has a program that applies for cover crops. So that's usually kind of a starting point to get you into Equip. So it's unlimited acres, maybe it's only 160 acres, but there are, like I said, some programs out there. And some of these are actually stackable on top of, like, say, Practical Farmers of Iowa or ADM. You got to be really careful there, but you got to really do your due diligence as far as looking into them, which is, by the way, part of this, okay? Making sure that, okay, you're not just applying for one program and that's it. What can we stack? What can we do the most that we can to get all this revenue, like I said, back to the operation? I'm going to keep saying that because it's kind of, for lack of better terms there, right? So some of the different private programs can be stackable upon the federal programs, right? So you can stack those, and all of a sudden we're stacking, $10 an acre on top of a $30 an acre program or something like that, right? And NRD also has a program for nitrogen reduction out there as well. So one thing to also keep in mind, if you're maybe trying to do a little bit of nitrogen reduction, there's a program out there for that. And so there's several different ways a guy can go about applying for these different programs. And you really just got to do your research, right? Like I just mentioned. Okay, a couple more here that I've been a part of in the past. And this one here I actually did a number of years ago, and I never actually took advantage of it within our farm, but it's called the Livestock Modernization Grant. Now, I will say some of these programs might be specific for our area here in Nebraska, but this was one that when I was looking at building a hog barn, this was probably 4 or 5 years ago already, and I looked at applying for this. Basically, this program, the Livestock Modernization Grant, was going to pay, I think it was 10% reimbursement for, say, building a hog barn. So now at the time, and things have gone up substantially since then, but at the time, I think the building was going to cost $800,000, and I was looking at getting about 10% back reimbursed. Okay, so that's $80,000 that I could have saved. Now, I never did go through with that just because there's multiple reasons, but there are programs out there like that. Then the big thing here is just to be an investigator, to see what's out there, see what's actually you can apply for, and then see what's going to work for you. But the next one here I did apply for about a year ago, and it's called the Pro Ag Grant. Once again, specific to Nebraska here, but what that was is for precision equipment, whether it be for applying for drones. Maybe it's for us, I used it for a GPS system. I bought an entire new GPS system, about 15 grand. And what I was able to do is to get over half of that paid for with this grant. Now, I had to go through the whole process of writing the grant. I had to fill out the application. I had to send in all of this information. I spent quite a few hours working on this, but I got probably over $8,000 back to our operation because I took the time to do that. All right. So really good opportunity there as well. Now, a couple of these others are just going to be maybe little things. But the big thing here that I didn't mention early on is just all the little things add. And that's the big thing here is all the little things add up. So one of these things here was just when we switched to utilizing, our crop insurance company that we use is Farmer Mutual Hail, and they went to utilizing precision data. So all of a sudden now we're taking our planting data and we're using that for our crop insurance reporting, and our acres were actually less. So we're paying less on our premiums, all right? We're paying less on our premiums, but then also less acres to actually divide that production over. So it's ultimately going to be helping our APH. So I think it ended up being like $1,200 that we saved in premium just because our acres were less by using precision data. Didn't have to do a lot there. So another really good opportunity there. This next one here, we're going to dive into the kind of the agronomy side of things. So for us, soil sampling and kind of being our own agronomist has really helped out a lot. Now, it's definitely good to bounce ideas off of somebody or to working with an expert and advisor that can help you kind of work through different ideas. But utilizing soil samples to maybe actually figure out what's out there so we can maybe cut back in certain places or just be more efficient. I think that's a really good way to bring kind of additional revenue, additional value back to the operation. Another couple options here on that same line is maybe just exploring different seed options, right? Maybe there's just something else that I can plant besides my typical Pioneer, DeKalb, or Bex, or maybe there's something else that I can do that's going to be a benefit that's not going to hurt my yield. We really got to explore the give and take there. But what else can we do here? All right, maybe there's a non-GMO variety out there that's a hell of a lot cheaper that we can look to explore and actually be more profitable that way, bring some additional dollars back that way. And then exploring new markets and new crops. This kind of goes back to maybe you look into some different cover crop seed. Maybe you raise this one-off cover crop seed that's starting to grow in your area and be more popular. But there's a lot of people in our area that have actually started growing rye seed for cover crop. Now, once again, once it becomes a commodity, that's usually when it starts to lose its value. And this last year, we definitely saw that. Here in 2025, the price for rye cover crop seed dropped substantially. And I think that was just because there's a lot of people raising it, and maybe a lot more people starting to use it. So now, maybe once that demand starts to spark, it's going to be a better option there. But really got to give and take on those, but just another route to look into, exploring some different markets. Maybe it's only raising 10 or 15 acres of this crop, but maybe it's a high value crop, or maybe it's something that you can do your best to market and get some more value back from that way. All right, and then a couple more here is the nutrient management side of things, and maybe manure or a byproduct. So maybe you can be really creative to find a product out there that you see some value in that maybe nobody else does. Okay, maybe it's something that you can apply to your ground, or maybe you can look at finding a grant, like I said, going through EQIP program. Maybe they can help pay for all of a sudden getting manure back to the operation. Maybe you can work out a deal you've got a neighbor that is focused more on the cattle or the livestock or the maybe poultry operation, hog operation, and they want to put up a building and they don't have a place to go with the manure. Maybe you can work out a deal so you can take the manure and maybe you just pay for application or something like that. And so there's a couple different ways out there. Maybe there's a byproduct like a local ethanol plant or close by from something that could be of value back to your operation. I need to stop saying that, by the way. But maybe there's a product out there that you can look to apply that you can also be saving on. Instead of spending all this money on fertilizer, you can now save on that, right? So a good option there as well. Okay, a couple more here. Also, for me in our operation about a year or two ago, I became a dealer for some different foliar fertilizers and some nutrient and stuff like that. So maybe becoming a dealer, and maybe it's not to where you're going to spend all of your time out there doing retail sales, but maybe it's just to literally get things at a cheaper price. How many bigger operations do you know that sell seed so they can just get that discounted price at wholesale, right? Or just kind of get that cheaper price so that way they're saving on that and they're bringing profit back to their operation that way, all right? It's a good option there. The couple last ones here are just kind of pretty standard, but I think they're worth mentioning. Maybe it's you're bringing value back by being a really good marketer. So in our operation, I will admit we do work with a marketing advisor, Zane from Trados, really good guy. But if it weren't for, us finding him and working with him directly, and building that relationship and trying to facilitate our needs, our market needs through him, it'd be really hard for him to even do our operation justice. Okay. So there's definitely a two-way street there. And so we can do our best to raise this crop and be as profitable as possible on the expense side and the income side. But I guess the income side is really where we got to be able to sell this thing for a profit, right? So we've got to be able to market this crop that we raise. So the marketing is a really good opportunity there to bring value back to your operation. A couple last ones here is maybe just being a mechanic. What can you do to provide, to look at your skills, and what's going to be something that you can, like I said, ultimately do that's going to help save money or maybe provide that money back to the operation. And then what we've been doing a lot here too is also custom work. We have all this lineup of equipment that we use maybe a month or two out of the year. How can we utilize this for something more? Maybe we've got a payloader that we can buy an attachment for and go do dirt work or something like that. Or maybe we've got a big tractor that we can use to pull a manure spreader in the off season, or just how can we maybe do some additional custom work to provide that revenue back to the operation? Okay, those are on-farm things that we've done or you could do just to maybe kind of get that brain moving, kind of spark that idea. What can you do to bring that back to the operation? Now, off-farm ideas, all right? I mentioned it earlier, but maybe some sort of retail dealership, whether that's seed, chemical, fertilizer, some sort of other planter parts. I've got a good friend of mine that sells, a lot of planter parts or just parts in general. So what can you do to maybe bring a retail dealership back to the operation? Another good one here off farm would be maybe a farm management. Okay, maybe you look at managing farms as a lot of people go to invest into real estate. Maybe you can be that farm manager and kind of use your skills that you already have, be a farm manager, maybe take in that whether it be like I said, the additional income from that you're going to be compensated for. And also along that same lines of being a farm manager, maybe a real estate agent. Okay, going back to, you're really good in the field, you're really good agronomist. Maybe you could be a crop insurance adjuster part-time. Fill some of those different needs throughout the year. Or the last thing, doing what I'm doing right here, being a consultant, being somebody that provides value back to others, being that advisor role, being somebody that takes your experiences you have thus far and utilizing that to be, say, a consulting to those out there that also need your help. Okay, so there's so many different ideas here off farm that we could get into. With today's day and age, you can pick up a phone, you can be a YouTuber, you could be an influencer, you could be a content creator, you could do all these things that I just don't think we give ourselves enough credit for all the skills that we have right now. And we got to be willing to go back to what I said earlier, just be willing to try new things. Don't be afraid of failure and just be creative and utilize the different opportunities that we have out there. This is like I said, supposed to be a very positive, optimistic episode. And that's the big thing I want to drive home here is just do the best that you can to be creative, to try these different ideas. The one thing I didn't mention, just because I think it's worth honing in on it, because I don't talk about livestock very much here, because our operation is shifted more towards row crops. But back to the livestock side of things, there's, once again, so many different opportunities there as well. The one thing that I think is worth looking into that maybe people are not familiar with is it's called sell by marketing. So in most cases, you've probably heard of, if you want to say background cattle or feed cattle or even cows, for instance, there as well as, okay, we're going to go to the sale barn. We're going to try to buy them cheap and sell them high, right? But what about the flip side of things? That's a buy-sell marketing, where this strategy is called sell by marketing. So you actually make your money back on the buyback. So, okay, you sell these cattle at this price. We're going to sell something that's overvalued and go buy something back that's undervalued. And that's where you're actually kind of making your profit from. If you want to look more into that, a couple guys, Wally Olson and Doug Ferguson, are a couple guys that kind of teach that strategy there. But really good one to look into there as far as kind of helping that cash flow side of things. And the big thing here with all of these different opportunities is to literally just help that cash flow. Yes, we're trying to bring the cash back to the operation, but the flow of the cash, right? The flow of the money at different times of the year, to bring that back at different times than maybe what our traditional revenue streams are bringing in currently, right? So really good way to look at that. Okay, but as we get to rounding this episode out, once again, a longer episode than what I want it to be. I just wanted this to be something that you can think about all the different ideas that are out there and be thinking about all the opportunities that we see. And for most of us that are kind of visionaries ones just kind of, like I said, always looking to the future, always looking at what we can do, always looking to capitalize on opportunities. That's where my mind goes. And oftentimes we see so many different opportunities out there. We want to do them all, and it's hard to choose. And I did mention earlier, and it's very contradictory as far as just always saying yes and be willing to do new things. But at the same time, you do have to be willing to do yourself justice as far as trying not to overextend yourself, trying not to do so many different things that we just half-ass everything. So got to be really careful with that. That's the biggest challenge as visionaries that see so many opportunities, is how do we decide which ones to go after? And that can be a really hard thing to do, but that ultimately kind of comes down to you and your preferences, what kind of aligns with your core values, what aligns with what time you have, what are going to be the biggest returns on investment for all of these different things. And with that being said, kind of going back to the takeaways, what can we do to provide value? And with that value, the hope would be is to be rewarded in the form of money, right? The hope would be to get that return on our time, return on our money, get that return on investment, but also to make sure that we're aware that in the initial start, sometimes not all ROI is going to be immediately in the form of money, monetary form, right? We always think of return on investment. How can that basically benefit me? How can I bring money back to me and myself and my operation? Yes, that's true. But very powerful statement that I heard a while back was not all ROI is in the form of monetary, right? And so, especially when it comes to early on, when you're starting to build your career and just trying to get your foot in the door, sometimes building connections is kind of like building sweat equity. Don't capitalize on it until later. So I'm going to say that one again because I thought that was really cool messages. Building connections is kind of like building sweat equity. We don't capitalize on it until later. Okay, so with all of these different things, maybe becoming a dealer, maybe applying for these different programs, building these connections, talking to these different people, doing custom work, maybe becoming a mechanic and helping out the neighbor, talking to trying to explore new markets out there, or being a consultant, talking with different farmers out there. all of these different things out here. There's a lot of value in building connections and building that network, and that, maybe one day down the road, it's going to give you a return on your investment there, return on your time. And so that's the big thing here, is because rounding this episode out is, what can you do to provide value back to your operation? And also make sure that we're acknowledging that not all ROI is going to be immediately in the form of monetary, right? There's a lot of ROI that might just come in the form of, say, this is the lifestyle we want to live. Say, this is the connections and the atmosphere that we want to live in and operate in. But also maybe this is, like I said, the connections, but the knowledge that we're trying to grow and the experiences that we're trying to have. So that way we could further ourselves in that regard as well. So I hope you found some value in today's episode. A long-winded one, talked a lot about a lot of these different things. But if any of these things spark your interest, okay, by the way, if any of these different programs you'd like to learn more about, if there's anything that you'd like to explore yourself or bounce some ideas off of somebody, by all means, I'm all ears and be willing to talk with our experiences, what we've been through, what we've seen. We want to talk actual dollar amounts versus just kind of high level things like we did today. By all means, reach out and be willing to have that conversation. If you're willing to actually explore into these different routes and the different options, you want to see once how many of these things are going to actually be a benefit to your cash flow, maybe being able to actually build out that cash flow so we can see once, where's our shortfall in cash? How can we maybe build something up to have an influx of cash in that time of year? Building out that cash flow can be extremely valuable as well. Value back to the operation there to make sure that we're managing that cash, managing that money. If you need help with that, we've got some really good tools, got some really good experience there, and being able to walk you through that and be able to provide that value to you. So reach out to me, Pioneer Farmer, and be willing to have that conversation. Otherwise, that's all I got for this week's episode, and we'll catch you guys next time. Thanks for tagging along with me today as we sharpened our mindsets. If you've gained insight from today's episode, be sure to take a screenshot to share or send this episode to somebody who might also find value in it. For more, follow me on Instagram @HereAtRustCamp or on Facebook, and join me next time for more conviction through clarity.